The first thing the officer asked me was my name. Not angrily. Not casually either. That careful tone cops use when something doesn't line up, but they haven't figured out why yet. I was standing on a gravel path that cut through land I'd owned for years. No fence, no gate, because there didn't need to be one. The property line was clear in every legal document that mattered. But according to the HOA behind me, I was trespassing. They were very confident about that. Karen, because of course it was, stood a few steps back with two other board members, arms folded, chin lifted, wearing the expression of someone who thought the situation was already over. She'd called the police claiming I had illegally entered community-controlled land and refused to leave when confronted. What she didn't expect was that I wouldn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand a supervisor. I simply answered questions. Yes, officer. This is my property. Yes, I have documentation. No, I am not part of the HOA. Karen interrupted constantly. He's lying, she said. We voted. This path belongs to us now. The officer glanced at her. Ma'am, votes don't transfer land ownership. That should have been the end of it. But Karen doubled down. She insisted there were easements. Emergency access clauses. Old agreements everyone knows about. She spoke fast, loud, and with just enough legal-sounding words to confuse people who didn't work with the law every day. The officer asked if anyone had proof. Karen proudly handed over a printed map. Highlighted. Annotated. Completely unofficial. I handed over something else. A folder. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just clean, organized, and precise. Deeds. Surveys. Recorded judgments. And a single ID card tucked into the front sleeve, facing inward. Unreadable unless you knew what you were looking at. The officer reviewed the documents carefully. Too carefully. His posture shifted. He asked me to wait a moment and stepped away to make a call. Not to dispatch. Not to his supervisor. Somewhere else. Karen smirked. See? You're done. I said nothing. When the officer came back, he didn't address Karen first. He addressed me. Sir, he said quietly. Can you confirm your current position? I met his eyes. Yes. Karen laughed. Position? What is this, a job interview? The officer ignored her. For the record, sir. I'm a sitting judge, I said. And this matter falls under my jurisdiction. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Karen's smile froze. One of the board members actually stepped back like the ground had shifted under him. The officer nodded once, not surprised anymore, just confirming what he'd already been told. Karen found her voice again. That doesn't matter. He's trespassing. The officer turned to her slowly. Ma'am, it matters a great deal. He explained that not only was the land privately owned, but that attempting to have someone arrested under false pretenses, especially a judge, was a serious issue. One that would not end with me leaving the property. Karen tried to interrupt again. Tried to argue procedure. Tried to reclaim control. That's when I finally spoke to her directly. You should stop, I said calmly. Right now. She didn't. And that was the moment the situation stopped being about trespassing and started becoming about whether her HOA would exist at all by the end of the week. Karen didn't understand what had changed. That was the problem. She could feel it, though. The energy had shifted, like a door closing quietly somewhere behind her. The officer who had been neutral minutes earlier now stood straighter, his voice slower, more deliberate. He wasn't negotiating anymore. He was documenting. Ma'am, he said, I need you to stop speaking for a moment. Karen scoffed. This is ridiculous. He's abusing his title. The officer didn't respond to that. Instead, he turned slightly away from her and began reading aloud from his notepad. Call placed alleging trespass. Claimant asserts ownership or control via HOA vote. Responding party presents recorded deed and judicial identification. Each word landed heavier than the last. Karen's fellow board members exchanged glances. One of them leaned toward her and whispered something urgent. She shook him off, still convinced that confidence could overpower reality. I stayed silent. That silence bothered her more than anything I could have said. "You can't just declare yourself above the law," she snapped at me. "I didn't," I replied evenly. "You brought the law here." That's when the officer asked the question Karen should have feared from the start. "Ma'am, were you aware that filing a false police report is a criminal offense?" Her mouth opened. Closed. "It's not false. We believed." "Belief," he interrupted, "doesn't override records." He then asked her to explain, step by step, how the HOA had determined the land belonged to them. She started confidently, talking about old understandings, neighbor use, and a board discussion from years ago. But when he asked for dates, signatures, recordings, or filed easements, her answers dissolved into vague gestures. Meanwhile, my documents sat on the hood of the cruiser. Clear. Filed. Verified. The officer requested the names of every board member involved in the decision to call the police. Karen hesitated. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "It is now," he replied. Her voice sharpened. "This is intimidation." He looked at her calmly. "No, ma'am. This is accountability." One of the board members finally spoke. Quietly. "Karen, maybe we should stop." She rounded on him. "Don't undermine me." That was when the officer turned back to me. "Sir," he said, "would you like to pursue this further?" Karen's head snapped toward me. Her eyes widened, not in anger this time, but in realization. I could end it there. Let it go. Ask them to leave. Or I could do what the system exists to allow. "Yes," I said. "I would." The officer nodded once and radioed in additional documentation. Not backup. Paperwork. Official reporting channels. Karen's name. The HOA's name. The nature of the accusation. Her phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Messages from other board members who weren't present. Someone had seen the police cars. Someone had posted a photo. Someone else had already contacted legal counsel. Karen tried to salvage control. "This doesn't go anywhere," she insisted. "HOAs do this all the time." "That," I said calmly, "is exactly why it does." The officer informed her she was not under arrest, but that the incident would be forwarded for review. He advised her not to contact me again and not to attempt further enforcement actions. She laughed weakly. "You're protecting him because he's a judge." "No," the officer replied. "I'm protecting the process." As they packed up, Karen stood frozen on the edge of the path she'd claimed wasn't mine. The same gravel, the same trees. Nothing had changed, except her understanding of who she'd tried to push. As the cruisers drove away, she finally looked at me, not with rage, but fear. "This isn't over," she said. I met her gaze. "For you," I replied, "it already is." Because what she didn't know yet, what she couldn't know, was that the review she'd just triggered didn't end with a report. It ended with authority looking back at her. And it was already moving. The next day, the consequences of Karen's actions began to ripple far beyond that single gravel path. What she thought would be a minor police visit turned into a full audit of her HOA's enforcement practices. Emails pinged in my inbox, incident reports, board minutes, HOA bylaws, old easement files, all coming in automatically from systems I monitored nationwide. Karen's confidence had evaporated completely. Her phone buzzed endlessly as every board member, attorney, and concerned resident began asking the same question: "What just happened yesterday?" She tried to answer, but each reply only reminded everyone that she had acted without authority, without verification, and without understanding that I wasn't just a landowner. I was the judge empowered to shut down improper HOA actions. By mid-morning, a legal liaison from the county reached out. They needed confirmation about jurisdiction, ownership, and any relevant easements. I sent over my clean, organized files, highlighting that every claim the HOA had made about control, access, or enforcement was invalid. Karen sat nearby, scrolling frantically on her phone, realizing that nothing she had could withstand formal scrutiny. Meanwhile, residents who had been watching the drama unfold from their property lines approached cautiously. They had seen Karen's SUV and police cruisers arrive, but they didn't know the real story. I explained quietly, this wasn't a conflict. It was a lesson in authority, documentation, and consequences. Their eyes widened when I showed them the dashboards and records. Everything the HOA thought they controlled was already being monitored, verified, and regulated. Karen tried one last tactic, a social media post claiming she had been standing up for the community. Within minutes, screenshots of official property records and deed confirmations were circulating, showing clearly that her narrative was false. Comments piled up, tagging her board members, showing how her claims of authority were not only inaccurate, but legally irrelevant. Panic spread among the HOA officers. Emails and calls flew back and forth as they scrambled to figure out how to mitigate the exposure. By afternoon, a formal summons arrived for Karen and her board, a meeting at my command office. Not a courtroom, not a public spectacle, but a controlled environment where all records, reports, and notifications would be reviewed. Every action she had taken, every police call she had initiated, and every assertion of authority would be laid out in black and white. When she arrived, she didn't strut. She didn't argue. She simply walked in quietly, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. For the first time, she realized that her attempt to assert power had backfired spectacularly. The meeting wasn't about confrontation, it was about accountability. Every false claim was documented, every attempt at intimidation noted, and every officer who had acted without jurisdiction exposed. Karen's world had shifted. She was no longer in control. Her HOA board had been humbled. Residents understood where real authority lay, and the message was unmistakable. Attempting to weaponize power against someone with proper authority has consequences far beyond the immediate conflict. After the command office meeting, the ripple effects were undeniable. Karen and her board were suddenly under intense scrutiny. Every action they had taken to assert control over my property, or to misrepresent authority, was now flagged and logged. What she thought would be a minor HOA dispute had turned into a permanent record of overreach. The HOA board tried to regroup. Emails were sent, residents were confused, and Karen attempted to explain her side of the story. But no one listened. Her credibility had been permanently damaged. The residents now knew that the driveway, the land, and the authority over it were completely and clearly mine. The HOA's claims had no standing. Meanwhile, my systems were quietly documenting every interaction. Not just for me, but to prevent similar abuses elsewhere. Notifications, audits, and compliance reminders spread automatically to other HOAs under my oversight. One mistake had become a nationwide lesson. Karen had unintentionally created a case study in overreach, arrogance, and the importance of verifying authority. Back on the property, life returned to normal. The driveway remained blocked. The gates were secure. Emergency access was logged, verified, and visible to anyone with the proper credentials. The tractor, the signs, and the physical barriers were not intimidation. They were clarity. Anyone who approached now knew exactly where boundaries lay. Karen's attempts to regain influence quietly failed. She tried a few indirect maneuvers, emails, phone calls, minor posts on social media, but each was met with documented responses, procedural explanations, or simply ignored. She was no longer the authority figure she imagined herself to be. Instead, she had become an example of how not to act. This subtle but powerful authority that isn't backed by law, documentation, and process can collapse instantly. Karen had tried to bend reality with confidence and volume, but it didn't work. She underestimated documentation, oversight, and the systems already in place to prevent abuse. The HOA board was in retreat. Residents were informed, boundaries were respected, and my property remained fully under control. Karen had learned the hard way that assuming power without knowledge isn't just risky, it's irreversible in its consequences. Karen and her board had been documented, warned, and formally educated on the limits of their jurisdiction. No further confrontation was necessary. The driveway stayed blocked, the gate remained secure, and the land's boundaries were respected universally. The physical presence of the tractor was a reminder, not of aggression, but of clarity and lawfully established authority. The HOA attempted no further interference. Residents, now aware of the full situation, approached cautiously at first, then confidently. They asked questions, sought clarifications, and were guided through the facts. The narrative that Karen had tried to sell, a land under HOA control, was shattered. Every record confirmed that not only did the HOA have no claim, but that any further attempts at enforcement would be met with immediate, documented accountability. Karen herself disappeared from active HOA involvement. She did not attend meetings. Her attempts to influence events through calls or minor emails were ignored or formally logged. She had learned, the hard way, that intimidation against documented authority achieves nothing. Every future HOA action was now automatically compared to recorded limits, preventing any repeat of her audacious attempt. Life on the property returned to normal. Deliveries were routed correctly, gates opened for authorized personnel, and the driveway remained a secure, private path. The lesson, subtle yet powerful, spread beyond just Karen. Authority is not about volume, intimidation, or assumption. It is about documentation, verified ownership, and proper channels. Finally, the HOA learned an unspoken truth. Challenging someone who holds legitimate, verifiable authority is not only futile, it risks exposure, accountability, and permanent loss of credibility. Karen's attempt to assert control didn't just fail. It set a precedent. Boundaries were established, authority was respected, and the property, along with its rightful owner, remained untouchable. In the end, the driveway stayed blocked. The land stayed secure. Karen and the HOA learned that real power doesn't shout. It stands firmly, backed by law, documentation, and unassailable authority. And that is exactly what I did. If you want, I can next create